when you're that close and all parties want a deal to be done and you've already had public acknowledgements that they'll be willing to let Bryan Mbeumo go, these things will happen.
With the confirmation of a deal for Matheus Cunha landing alongside the welcome revelations regarding Bruno Fernandes, Manchester United are closing in on a deal for Bryan Mbeumo. We're covering all, with the potential move for Viktor Gyokeres, the future of Marcus Rashford, Antony, your questions and more. All on the latest episode of your Theatre of Red. How is everyone doing on this miserably rainy summer day? I hope you are all reasonably recovered from the trauma of a forgettable season and somewhat intrigued by what appears to be the sound of righteous cogs turning regarding a promising transfer window in the northwest. Naturally, the propaganda machine is in full flow with speculative reports regarding everything from transfer fees, prospective signings and bizarre wages for all. Now, despite the words of a few unfortunate individuals on social media, neither my guest nor I aim to generate any form of traction from nonsense, because when it's all said and done, it'll generally come back to bite you in the arse. But there is much to discuss, my friends, and who better to spend some quality time with than a man who devotes every bit as much of his day to football and Manchester United. My good buddy, Mr. James Roades. Out of curiosity, sir, how was the weather on your end today?
Actually pretty similar to what I'm hearing on that side. Over here in Colorado, it's usually very sunny. We have the most sunny days in the entire United States, actually, but it has been raining almost solidly for 2 weeks, which is extremely unusual. So we've had a very wet English or Irish or however summer as it might be as well.
Ain't that just bloody typical on the one day that I ask? At least we have Manchester United to keep us entertained anyway. And on that, James, for some clubs, the end of the season spells a couple of relatively quiet months with the odd deal here and there. However, as we all know far too well, this is when things generally start heating up for Manchester's biggest football club. There's only one place to begin with today. That is with Wednesday's news regarding Bruno Fernandes and his decision to disregard a literal fortune in Saudi to remain in Europe with Manchester United and essentially persevere with a project that has consumed the best years of his majestic footballing career. At 30 years old, he has become the weekly whipping boy of a struggling football club that has just finished 15th and obviously limped to that horrific Europa League final defeat. His departure was right there alongside the caveat of not being begrudged for making the decision by the majority of the fan base. However, whatever way it's going to be spun, Manchester United's captain has opted to listen to his family, his manager, and the outpouring of grief from a disgruntled supporter base about his potential goodbye. I know some have taken to proceed with a notoriety-laden agenda, as per, about his lack of suitability for this rebuild. But in all honesty, while many will veer towards the benefits of £100 million, and it is big, I just couldn't fathom losing one of the greatest attacking players in the world. How are you feeling regarding the news of his decision and his presence in a side that is gunning for immediate redemption?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, and I think that you're right in that it's very easy for people to take the news of his staying, look at the money and say, well, if we had that money, we could rebuild the whole team and everything would be better. There's some potential truth in it, but I don't think there is any sort of objective wrong answer to what might have been the outcome here. If Bruno Fernandes were to leave, yes, the money would have helped United on the track to adding more players and building up more players and taking this team maybe in a bit of a different direction. But as he is staying and expected to stay, unfortunately, United are just have to be happy to be left with one of the best players in the world. What a terrible thing, right? So I think there's really no wrong answer. And I could see it both ways. And there were times when definitely I said myself that I probably would lean towards the side of him leaving, but you can't be unhappy about him staying either, because you're just keeping a great player, a wonderful human being, and somebody in the squad who will help us rebuild. There's risks with transfers. There's always the possibility you sign two players, one works, one doesn't, and in the aggregate, you end up still worse off than you were when you had Bruno. There are no guarantees in this business at all. But Bruno Fernandes close to a guarantee of something as you've had for many, many years at United. So I'm very happy with it. And I think that I would have been happy the other way too if he had made that choice for himself, because I think it would have been understandable and it would have been either way somewhat of a win-win for everybody. But as it were, he's decided to stay. And I think that's very brave. And I think that it's very admirable as well. You know, it is a lot of money. I understand that it can seem like once you've already been making 10, 20 million, that what's more money do at that point in time. And I don't make that kind of money. So I'm not saying I have that firsthand experience, but 200 million tax free is a lot more than 20 million in terms of life, in terms of family, in terms of future generations. But he made that choice with his family and he stays. And so United will continue with him and he will continue to hope that we get it right and work around him well so that while he is still here, while he's still kicking and while he's still flying in full, United could win something. And I don't think anybody can say he wouldn't deserve to be a part of a United project that does get back on top and would be one of the, I don't know, most memorable players in the post Sir Alex Ferguson era for United. So we can only hope we get back there with him.
I think that's a pretty fair synopsis, all things considered. If he had left, you could make some plausible sort of positive out of it. It's what we try to do anyway. But in staying, you're going to do the same. And the one thing you touched on that really resonates with me, you could get 100 million. You can buy fantastic footballers, but yet there is no guarantee of what they're going to bring. Whereas with Bruno Fernandes, you know what he's going to bring. I think a huge portion of his decision relied on the promises and the assurances that he was given about the summer and the future of the squad and what it's going to look like in moving forward. From his perspective, who better to begin with than the impending arrival of Matheus Cunha from Wolves? No, we're looking at £62 million, £62.5 million to be paid in 3 installments over 2 years. While we have much to natter about regarding potential deals here today, I wanted to begin with the Brazilian because I'm spending some time with a fellow tactical fan. Now, many have questioned Ruben Amorim and his insistence to persevere with his philosophy, given the lack of goals and a killer instinct in the final third. However, for me, on paper, Cunha is ideal for the left side of this attacking role in Amorim's 3-4-2-1, thanks largely to his work rate and his desire to drop deep, collect the ball, and forcefully power forward. The biggest thing that stands out to me for the amount of coverage that I gave on the continental game over the last 5 to 6 years is just how reminiscent it is of Paulinho during his time at Sporting. He's a very similar playing style for this system, and something that also many are unaware of, an almost identical domestic output. It's actually quite freakish because Cunha has just come off of a domestic season where he's earned 15 goals and 6 assists, while Paulinho had 15 goals and 5 assists with 2 fewer games during Amorim's last full season at the club, playing in the exact same position. Many individuals will point to his goals, his creativity, both of which are obviously undeniable. But having spent as much time digesting his play as a forward throughout the season as possible, it's evident that he is a scholar of the game, James. He understands, he appreciates the technical side, everything from his game management to his ability to control the tempo at critical moments, and Wolves require that multiple times through the season. His clinical nature is not only underlined by the 17 goals that he scored in all competitions. When you peel it back, many either refuse to see it or are unaware of the versatility across the front line. His ability to play as a centre forward, the fact that he has done so for more of his career than he has not, and the clinical nature of his finishing. And to put all that in perspective, over the last 2 seasons, he ranks higher than Salah, Cole Palmer, Alexander Isak for chance conversion rate in the Premier League. So, given your love of structure and news of Bruno's decision to stay, just how excited are you by the prospect of Cunha linking up with Amorim and his new captain?
Very excited. Very, very excited. I mean, it is challenging at times to have discussions with people about the way that Ruben Amorim will want to play, because for most people, their experiences in seeing it have only been since he arrived at United with a squad very much unfit for purpose for a manager who is probably more than anybody that has come in recent times, a system manager, a manager who likes to play a specific way, who likes to get exact profiles and exact positions. And once he gets them, they stay there. Really funny, just an anecdote on that. I was looking at the numbers for Giovanni Quenda, who United end up not signing, going to Chelsea. And when Ruben Amorim was there, he played every single game in the exact same position on that right wing back side, every single game. And the minute Ruben Amorim left, the next manager shifted him and he started bouncing around positions all over the place. Ruben Amorim really likes his profiles and positions. And what is really exciting about Cunha is, as you mentioned, it is not just the scoring and the output, but the problems when people talk about things like the build-up. How do we progress the ball? How do we get through it in the middle? The thing that goes under recognized, under realized is just how much those forwards are a part of that in a Ruben Amorim system that only has two real midfielders. There's a lot of times you look at it and think, well, the midfield is empty. And it is the difference between having forwards who, like Cunha, are individuals who drop in, who play almost as auxiliary midfielders at all times, and the forwards who are constantly on the run forward as an outlet. And we'll see a dramatic shift, not just in our ability to score in the final third, to have more players to pass to, more players who can actually shoot, more players who can finish chances, because no doubt that has been a massive, massive problem. But the entire structure where a two-man midfield becomes a four-man midfield because the 10s are properly dropping in the way that they should and creating numerical advantages in each phase of the play, which is the whole advantage of this structure when done right. It's not emptying the midfield, but filling it in the right circumstances and then pushing forward and doing the same in attack. And Cunha fits that. And it's not something everyone can do. Not every forward out there has the skill set. And that is why it is so particular to someone like Cunha to be the first signing, because not every forward has that skill set of being able to come into those spaces while also providing an elite level of attacking output at the other end. It's a very unique type of thing. And United have certainly had forwards in the past who could do these types of things in different ways. You think of how Wayne Rooney could contribute at every single level of play rather than just being as a forward. You could have called him a midfielder, you could have called him a striker, you could have called him a winger. It doesn't matter. He was doing it all. Cunha is a type of player who can do that and does do that, and it contributes to the team in such a massive way. So it is extremely exciting, for the quality of the player, but also for the simple fact of how we will actually have taken a huge step towards what the manager wants and where we are really intending to go in terms of a style, in terms of a direction.
As promising a start to the window as that was, we then saw the club's ambitions and their desires within 24 hours of the news of an impending bid for Bryan Mbeumo. Now, the player, he wants the move, in personal terms, will not supply any issues. At this stage, it's all about Brentford and how difficult they plan to make negotiations. Interest in the player is something that we've discussed for several months at the Theatre of Red, and having been made of the criteria for incoming forwards in early January and confirmation of a specific shortlist of potential targets in late February and early March. I spoke last week, having received categoric confirmation of an impending move for the player, and we're told that the essential KPI this summer lands in a desire to have the majority of business done early in the window to remove as much of the burden from Amorim as possible, allowing him to focus solely on the football throughout the pre-season. Jason Wilcox has been promoted to the Director of Football, with Dave Brailsford stepping back. Wilcox obviously shares a good relationship with Amorim, both possessing similar desires for how the squad and the structure within the club should look within 2 to 3 years. We know an opening bid in the excess of £50 million, including those performance-related add-ons, with Brentford desiring something closer to the fee being shelled out for Cunha. Now, despite reports that the Londoners are keen to drag this into the dirt if necessary for as long as they can, we do believe that there is a general understanding of a desire to get the deal done in relatively pain-free manner from both sides, maintaining control of a deal to allow multiple payments. From your end, how do you view proceedings over the coming days and weeks?
I think it'll be fairly expeditious, as we've kind of seen with this new structure. I was pretty amused when some of the reportings came out over the Cunha deal in the final day of its agreement, as you went from United asking about payment terms and being rejected to everything's fine 30 minutes later, which was just a bit of the fun you get in the media cycle that surrounds United in the way that they bid and attack these types of things. But realistically, both sides want this done. I don't bite too much into, reports of clubs being bothered by how it's gone in the media, or bothered by a player being convinced they want to join first, or things like that. At the end of the day, it's business. Business is not particularly emotional. And clubs like Brentford are very well-run clubs. For the size of their club, they really punch well above their weight. I have a lot of admiration for Brentford. If you use the term Moneyball, I don't think there is a team that exemplifies it more than Brentford, given the size of their budget, the size of their wages, and everything. The fact that they're in the Premier League, but not just in it, but regularly now finishing near the top half, is incredibly impressive. Now, a sale for Bryan Mbeumo at £60 million would encompass more than a third of their yearly revenue in total. It is a huge deal for a club like them. And I believe it'll be worked through fairly easily, fairly quickly on both sides. We've seen that on the United side. They're not dragging these things anymore. They work through them. They have the talks. They find the right solution and push it through to get done. They will have an understanding of what Bryan Mbeumo himself has been told by Brentford that he can leave for, and they're simply looking for space in that negotiation to see if there is anything that can be done in addition, to the general asking price. Realistically, if United, their initial offer being in that 45 plus 10 bracket, the total probably will have to come up 5 million, and then the structure of it is all that matters. When you're that close and all parties want a deal to be done, and you've already had public acknowledgements that they'll be willing to let Bryan Mbeumo go, he's in the final year of his contract next season, these things will happen, and I don't think they will be dragged out particularly. It doesn't seem to suit anyone for anything like that to go on. So I wouldn't be shocked in the slightest if it isn't fairly wrapped up, at least from a sense of the basics of the deal by the weekend.
It's pretty much what we're hearing on this end as well. The general consensus that we have received from several different individuals on the ground is that we're looking at 50 plus performance-related add-ons that could bring it up to 60. Yep. But you see, and this is where it gets skewed, and this is where so many journalists have lost their integrity, James. It's not about reporting accurate information and putting plausible cause beside it. It's about sensationalism, and it's about overselling something and overanalyzing it to the point when the statistics that are provided really don't provide any merit. When you look at this from the whole, he's a guy in the last year of his contract, but realistically speaking, he's only approaching 26 years of age. He's not at his prime yet. He's only looking at it, and already he's a perennial goal scorer. This is a guy who comes into this football team and immediately improves. His stock naturally has gone from here down to here in the last week with rival supporters because he's choosing Manchester United for nothing other than money, apparently. Even though this preposterous claim about wages just makes no sense because the general semblance of, we'll say, structure within the club is looked at being kept at anywhere around 190 to 200,000 in general for a certain caliber of player. Realistically speaking, you take Cunha, you take Bryan Mbeumo. These are two players that will come in and command a starting place in the team while understanding the requirements, as you've made reference to, with Amram and his structure and his almost OCD-like approach to making sure that his tactical philosophy is adhered to. Now, on the other side of that, so much of the potential incomings, they're going to rely on outgoings with Marcus Rashford, Antony, Jadon Sancho, Casemiro, supplying a quartet of high earners who are being actively sought for a departure. Now, to bring any listener up to speed with where we are regarding these players, as I confirmed last week, my buddies at Goal over in Spain, having worked alongside my colleague Albert Fernandes for many months, we revealed the nature of the package that Barcelona are willing to offer United to lure long-term target Rashford to the club. Given their well-documented and somewhat bizarre financial situation over in Spain, a season-long loan with an obligation to purchase for far below the desired, let's say, £40 million that was being targeted by United is their aim, with a view to add reasonable performance-related add-ons and the caveat of paying 100% of his wages. Now, we know that United will not entertain a figure as low as Barcelona are aiming for, but a deal between the clubs is far from closed because Hansi Flick remains a keen admirer. And that's despite the ongoing scenario with Luis Diaz. You look then elsewhere, Betis, they'd love nothing more than to acquire another deal for Antony if it's some way possible. But then outside of that, he's attracted the attention of many with a standout spell at the club, amidst new interest from the likes of Atletico Madrid, Dortmund, and many more. Sancho, as we know, is being sent back from Chelsea with a £5 million penalty, and that just speaks volumes about his character. And then you have Casemiro, only has a year left on his deal, having previously been linked with the Saudi Public Investment Fund venture. And this summer will likely present the last opportunity for United to bank any fee for a 33-year-old player, while also offloading his mammoth wage. Now, James, although some may be irked with losing the Brazilian given his emergence throughout the second half of the season, it is a necessary venture, with all four giving their wages and the fees to be recouped. I know you've been focusing somewhat on Antony lately as well as the rest, but what is your standpoint on the four of those players as a whole during the summer?
Yeah, I think that in general, of course, it is best for all parties that any of them can move on at this point in time because of what you mentioned there. The obvious direction of travel with the purchases, as we've seen from this summer and the last, the oldest player brought in is, I believe, Mazraoui at 27 years old for 15 million, a very reasonable fee on reasonable costs, because they want to put together a squad of players that will be here. Not only do you need, in order to reach title aspirations, a quality team, but you need quality time. That is one of the underrated factors in building a consistent and reliable team. Nobody really in the Premier League especially competes for a title off of one season. In general, they put multiple seasons together with a strong core of individuals playing within a team with ideally very few changes between one season to the next, so that they can learn to play with each other. The speed of thought, the speed of wavelength, these types of things matter in building a team that is intended to compete. So when you have players on the books, regardless of where they're at right now, whether they play, as in the case of Casemiro, he's not going to be here in the next season. He's not going to be here for the long haul. You don't want to spend the season playing regularly with players who won't be there next year, who won't be there in 2 years, because that doesn't give you that continuity, that doesn't give you that connection that you need to have and start building between everybody. So they are all expected to depart in one way or another, or I should not necessarily say expected, but the intention would be that they should depart one way or another to different clubs. As you covered there, there's a lot of interest growing in a few. I did not think a year back from today that Antony might be the one with the most interest, but of course he had an extremely successful loan over in Betis. They want more talks. They want to do things there. Leverkusen, with Erik ten Hag joining there, is also seemingly presenting an interest. As you say, Marcus Rashford to Barcelona has always been his dream move, right? That's where he would go if he had left United, and he turned them down when they came to make offers a few years ago to stay at United. So where things are at today, there's been a lot of admiration from both sides, and as I think it was reported very recently by David Ornstein and them over here in England, that Liverpool have put a full hands off on Luis Diaz for Barcelona, and that of course leaves Rashford as their best bet, and I think that strengthens, of course, United's hand in said negotiations as well. I think Casemiro would be the most difficult to shift because of the age, because of the wages and the remaining fee, and what seems to be a lack of any concrete move, despite some of the chat from Saudi where the wages would be no problem. It seems difficult to see where he would get that kind of money elsewhere in Europe. And there may not be a choice in the matter for United on that front. That's what you get when you give out those contracts. You lose a lot of your power in the negotiations. You lose a lot of your power in the discussion. And lest we not forget as well, all of these, every one of these players that we're talking about was signed in the prior hierarchy, under prior management, under prior leadership. So the contracts are not in line with the deals that we're signing now. The pay is not in line with the deals we're signing now. So you have a lot of complications in these, and United will have to be creative. And the one thing I would warn anybody is we shouldn't expect to see huge financial gains from moving these players off in the immediate. It is the long-term benefit of moving these players off, of reducing the overall consequences amortization wise of the overall wage budget and freeing up space. That's not to say it won't help open the door for signings, because it will. But I don't think one should look at it on the basis of, if we got 30 million for Antony, we've got 50 million in the market. It's not going to work that way. He's going to give us a little bit of room if something like that were to happen. And realistically, we may end up in a position where the club are accepting loans with obligations later on for a lower fee that helps them in the next season take the player completely off the books, but just reduces the wages for now. There's going to be creative options there, and that's the situation that the club do find themselves in dealing with what you might call past mistakes or past miscalculations.
Unfortunately, that is the truth, listeners. That is the burden of incompetence, I'd say, James.
Yes.
Now, as I alluded to a few moments ago, I have started to make a serious effort to include some listener episodes. First and foremost, to everybody who has submitted some, and I will not be able to address, please understand, I'm now receiving dozens of these. So it's not a reflection on you or the question, it's just a reflection on time. So do please continue to send them in weekly. I'm going to begin with one for you, James. It has come in from an individual on Twitter called Ioana Agafeo. And he asks, nice and simple, are there chances of signing a centre-back in the summer?
That's a good question. From my understanding, the chances are extremely low at this point in time. When Lissandro picked up his injury, it looked to be something that would move to the forefront of the plans this summer. And especially should United have gotten back into European places where you have more games, of course, to play, more rotation is necessary. But a few things happened. One, you miss out on Europe. Two, the prominence or rise of Aiden Heaven, they've been so impressed with his performances, and for good reason, because so have I, so has everybody. When you watch the kid play, he sustained, of course, that one injury, but has come back and looked just as good when he returned. His performance against Aston Villa was as good as any we've seen from a centre-back at United this season. You can see it in every action that he has something there. And I believe Ruben Amorim himself even acknowledged in an interview in February or March about this exact subject. And he mentioned at that time that these things happen and they change your plans. And he specifically mentioned the seeing Aiden Heaven changed their plans for thinking about a centre-back after Lissandro went down. And there's really no other evidence to the contrary at this point. It will become a subject, certainly by next summer, as Harry Maguire heads through the last year of his now option year, which is this coming season. But very likely they're looking at it as something that can be on the back burner with the options that they have to deal with in a future season and ensure that all the money they have goes towards the numerous other problems that have to be addressed this summer.
It's something I was actually speaking with somebody about on Twitter over the last week or two. If, and I know it's a big if with Manchester United, but if all those players remain fit and you have 5 players in Matthias de Ligt, Lissandro Martinez, Lenny Yoro, Aiden Heaven, and Harry Maguire, not even mentioning the versatility of Nasser Mazraoui, and then the likes of Tyler Fredrickson coming through with that talent and potential, we have quite a good selection of central defenders, even to fit into a 3-man centre back. So I don't think it is the biggest priority, if given reports as well of what we're hearing about Lissandro Martinez coming on well with his comeback, because I do think he's going to be integral in this system as well as a ball-carrying central defender. I want to move on to quite an interesting contribution from an individual that goes by the name of Finnbauer on Twitter. It's interesting because of developments regarding a certain Swedish hitman at Sporting and an ongoing desire to generate in the region of 70 million euro to acquire his services. And just to clarify, people, it is very real. And although some may have written off the possibility of Viktor Gyokeres to Manchester United a long time ago, there is more than a suggestion here. It's becoming abundantly evident that the player wants to move to United if United can generate the funds, because he's interested in reuniting with his former manager. It ties me back always to something that I mentioned in either February or March. Essentially, you can call me old-fashioned, and plenty of people do. But the suggestion of being the man to steer Manchester United to the head of the table has to have a certain ring to it. It just has to. And I know it's very much playing a part in the conversations with Mbeumo and Cunha. But Finbar has asked, given the attacking reinforcements that have already been or will be signed, would we settle for a cheap but experienced striker like Welbeck or Vardy or both if it meant signing a top-of-the-range midfield target like Wharton or Baleba in the summer?
Yeah, it is a really interesting question. If you were to ask me in a pure one-to-one, would you rather have the elite midfielder or the elite striker? I would pick the striker 9 times out of 10, most likely, in just the way that I view football. I find that at the end of the day, it is the front and the back of the team. I feel similarly about a goalkeeper. That is the front and the back of the team that can often decide games because they decide goals in moments. Midfielders, of course, keep the ball ticking, they keep the game moving, they keep the game running, but it is the exact moment the ball is struck that decides whether it is a goal or not. It is that one individual moment. There are rarely the same level of individual moments that happen in other areas of the pitch, and the same goes for a goalkeeper. As we've seen, the individual moment of making a save or not making a save or how the save is made can have such a huge impact on the game beyond the realm of anything else. And I think back to United's time, and I'm not saying United have not had unbelievable midfielders over the years, but we've also had always unbelievable forwards to a level that is we've never even approached since. While at many times having, maybe in American terms, you call it glue guys in the midfield, your Fletchers, your Parks, similar players like that have not always been the best players in the world, but there's always been elite forwards. And it's something that they used to do really well. Whenever one would diminish, go and buy the next elite forward to come through, someone already performing like a Berbatov or a Van Persie or someone like that to come in. I think that it's really unlikely that they would prioritize another midfielder this summer over spending on a striker unless the striker cannot be obtained. And Viktor Gyokeres being on the table, being someone who is available, being someone who would very likely want to return with Ruben Amorim. I think back to there was a quote that went in April from his agent that said it'd be very difficult for Viktor Gyokeres to stay at Sporting with Amorim leaving, that he had 8 proposals on the table and picked Sporting specifically for Ruben Amorim, and obviously holds him in extremely high regard in how he's assisted in his career, taking off to a whole nother level at Sporting, and vice versa. He remains Ruben Amorim's far and away personal top choice for a striker, no matter what happens. So unless this were to become impossible or something they couldn't do, then I would be very open to someone like a Welbeck if it meant that in the following window or next couple of windows, we would go back for another elite striker and ensure we get one. I was a big doubter on the idea of buying another young 20, 22-year-old striker on my side. It was something I had a lot of doubts on, seeing in that position the amount of pressure that can be put on a player. So yeah, unless they cannot get this elite striker, who really all that remains in the market for United is Gyokeres on this front, I don't see them prioritizing a very expensive, potentially elite midfielder over that position this summer.
If Gyokeres is available, which he is, and if Manchester United can put together 70 million euros to get him, then you go and you do that. Absolutely. Because as I'm saying, goals win games. I think it's more so looking at it along the lines of if you can't get the 70 million euros, but it's something you could do in 12 months' time, could you use a stopgap? And that is something I would be on towards doing rather than going and spending 50 on the wrong option. You know?
Yes.
Something else has come in here, and it is from the ever popular United exclusive account on Twitter. Now, I want to say as well, they become a firm supporter of what we're doing at the Theatre of Red. As always, we appreciate every bit of it. So thank you. Before I get to the question, I want to add a couple of lines beforehand. Given what we know regarding Rasmus Højlund, as you just mentioned, and Andrew Onana's desire to stay, and the crucial topic of book value, that so many people forget when discussing transfers, with the requirements we have to offset the remaining transfer fee owed with any fee that's coming in. I think this is something that people totally forget about, and people automatically think if you get X for this player, it means you have Y here, when in reality there's still money that needs to be paid off to offset that book value, and so many people forget about it. But I'm going to leave this one with you entirely, James. They ask, what specific positions are Manchester United prioritising in the upcoming window, and which players are being seriously considered for those roles?
Yeah, so as far as I understand it, there's a long plan that started at the beginning of last summer where they just to think with how this new regime and setup operate, I think is really important. Because in the past, you might have looked at it and gone into a summer and said, we want 3 positions in, out, right? This is what Ole Gunnar Solskjaer mentioned, that this was how it was running under the Glazers. We want 3 positions. You get 3 signings this summer, 3 in, 3 out. That's the limit. That's what we want to do. And it was generally in a very sort of short-sighted view. The way that this new regime operated is when they came in, they made a full assessment in their eyes of how do we turn this team over and build a full squad that is everything. And so the reason I go into that explanation is that in a way, there aren't positions targeted for this summer. There is just the plan. And how much of the plan can we get done is the plan. But to be particular with it, there was the 2 tens, as we might call it. The options there we know, Cunha and Mbeumo, both of those should be done. In addition, there was the striker. We know that Liam Delap was a serious one that went to Chelsea. However, we also know that Viktor Gyokeres remains a top target in that position. Moving beyond those, there is the need for an 8, an athletic midfielder to run in the midfield, someone to get around, someone to work, someone to move, as Casemiro will of course depart at some point in the future. Kobbie Mainoo has not quite yet nailed down his role, though I would still suggest that this one has room for change depending on how Kobbie Mainoo's development goes this summer. Depending on health, it's been a bit difficult with the injuries that he has sustained to see it the maximum of what we can from Kobbie Mainoo, and I think that's still an open story there. There is the goalkeeper front. Now, I just want to say on that midfielder front, I truly do not know who they might be targeting beyond Ederson, who is very likely to be the replacement for Bruno at the Saudi League, the player that they're targeting now that Bruno has turned them down. A goalkeeper for sure, we've seen. They're looking for a young player to come in and compete. They don't want to go and spend 60, 70 million in the goalkeeper market. The names like Lamens, the Belgian keeper, seem to be at the forefront of that discussion. Beyond that, they will want a deep midfielder. Adam Wharton is a long-term admirable player, but one that is potentially impossible in the immediate and likely to come up again next summer. And then they would move to a center back. And I would say in addition, what could come into play here is somebody who could play wide. But again, I would suggest a more affordable player. I know that you've spoken in the past, Shaun, about Roger Fernandes as an individual that could fit into this kind of discussion. On the other side, a little bit of an oddball name, but Callum Hudson-Odoi has been properly linked to United as someone who could fit if potentially affordable, that has the frame and the work rate and the ability to play out wide as a wing back in the system, or in the left-sided 10, as of course United have lost all of them in Garnacho's situation, being one away from the club as well. Even with Cunha coming in, they do lack a little bit of maybe the sort of natural runners from the left that you might have had so many of in the past. So there are numerous positions, and I guess I would say that there's not necessarily this summer targets, but how much can we get done? And I think the order is in about the sequence that I mentioned there.
Well, I think the proof is in the pudding when you look at the progression of this side under Amorim throughout the season. You know, there was high moments and low moments in terms of what we saw with ball progression and the overall philosophy of the team, but ultimately it always fell foul in the final third. Lack of goals in the Premier League clearly highlights this, so reinforcing that final third was always going to take priority. I do have one final question here from a long-time listener in Params Subramanian on Twitter. This is a good question. He says, all fans, me included, are thrilled for Bruno to stay and are happy with the news that he's turned down an offer for big money. Our emotions, as well as the rather exaggerated outpouring of it in news, media and social media, shouldn't stop us from asking a couple of inconvenient questions. Which version of Bruno are we happy with? And importantly, which version of Bruno are we not happy with? Both as a player and as a captain. Also, with Cunha's arrival, there's the likelihood that we may see Bruno in a defensive midfield role every now and then as opposed to an attacking midfielder, with the latter being more effective. How does Amorim navigate this scenario? Let me lead off with this because I think it's a perfectly relevant question, and I feel the latter part of this will complement the entire conundrum. It's what I've spoken about with Cunha already, because Bruno, as we know, he's a creative monster. He thrives when presented with runners and open spaces in front of him. However, his engine is well documented. He's got a sterling ability to backtrack and aid in the break. With Cunha, as previously discussed, we inherit a final third monster who craves work rate, and he insists in dropping deep to support the transition. Funnily enough, he shares many of the personality traits with Bruno. He's got his arms flaring, alongside this competitive mindset, which, as we know, often leads to disciplinary issues. But his willingness to track back will mirror that of Paulinho in Amorim's sporting system, and he was integral when aiding in the build-up while moving to the final third. There can almost be an interchange as well, I believe, at times between the two players in this United system, and that will inevitably lead to final third loads centrally, and that was absolutely key to Sporting's goal-scoring success under Amorim. So how do you see the role of Bruno in moving forward with Cunha, Mbeumo, and any additional recruits that we may see?
Yeah, it is a really interesting question because I think that I understand the concerns, which I may have as well myself, about Bruno playing in a deeper role. I think being one of the main questions a lot of people have when you look at it and say, well, if Bruno's moving back into what we might call that 8 role, is that the best place for him? Do we have concerns that defensively it's not his strong suit? Positionally, he doesn't provide maybe the steal in defense as at times we saw with certain partnerships, certainly in the Europa League run when it was Casemiro and Ugarte through the knockout rounds until the final. I think some could look at it and say, maybe it was a bit of a mistake losing that stability in the middle that we had and going into the final with Bruno in, let's say, the midfield. However, one of the things that I would add to this is when Sporting's team was really settled and when Amorim's system is really settled, that attacking 8, that extra 8, is not a defensive midfielder. It's somebody you want to have really high work rate, really high energy, which he preferred with Morita. He even made comments about him culturally having a commitment to hard work and to sacrifice and being able to put everything into it. And he was a player who provided a lot of energy, but would operate very often in the attack as that extra attacking midfielder in those central areas, running into the box late, arriving on the end of chances, and providing that numerical dominance that you need in the final third in order to break down teams that are defending rather deep. So I think that Bruno's success or failure in a deeper position will very likely be tied inextricably to the success or failure of the rest of the team to become dominant. The more dominant that it is, the better Bruno will look in that position, and the better we will feel about having a player with his attacking qualities in that position. And the more we will think, yeah, it's better we don't have another defender in that position. We want someone with those qualities in the attacking areas. So for me, it's a question of just how good we can become. Because if we are a bad team, if we play poorly, we will likely struggle. If we lose the ball a lot, if the other team can beat our press too easily, if they can play with more of the ball, then you might see the downsides of Bruno being there. But alternatively, if we can maintain high possession, we will see a lot of positives for Bruno being in that position of having the ability to front 3 forwards, 2 wing backs, and that attacking 8. And just bear in mind, most modern teams, Pep Guardiola, Klopp, of course, not being manager anymore, but same goes for Slot. In the attack, they play what you might consider a 3-1-6, 6 attackers, 1 sitter in the midfield, and 3 defenders. Amram's system with Bruno in that midfield is really no different than that. You have those 3 attackers, you have those 2 wing backs like you might see as wingers, and you have that extra midfielder moving up, and you have the 3 center backs already naturally in a defensive position, as opposed to perhaps a fullback sliding over to make a part of the back 3. So from that sense, it's really no different, but it is often perceived as different because it starts from a different place as a system that might have a 4-back. But in effect, if it's working, it should be no different and should provide us with the type of numbers that we want, which is to have 6 players attacking the box and what you need, especially in the Premier League, to break down these teams that are so big, strong, and capable of defending in their own areas.
It is important to remember as well, even now in 2025, more so than ever, formations are largely put there for pre-match analysis, for Football Manager, for FIFA. The interchange, it was completely visible in the Champions League final. You could see so many of those Paris Saint-Germain players moving around the field that you had no idea what position they were actually occupying at any given time. So it's the way modern football is going. It's interchange, it's versatility, it's character desire, and it's having particular personalities in those positions to be able to make defining decisions when it matters. And James, we can only hope that with the incomings we have, with Bruno staying and with Amram's philosophy, having another pre-season, well, actually having a pre-season to work through, that we're going to see something actually beneficial at the end of it all. And as always, sir, it has been an absolute pleasure to spend some time with you today. What have you got coming up over the next few days and weeks?
The usual. It's been busy. I've been trying to put in as much as I can on this. I'll be making a couple other little appearances here and there. Always like to, go on and work with other people who I feel are like-minded and putting out reasonable and good content to the United community, because we can always use more of that to offset some of the other things that are out there. And as always, every day I'll be trying to put something out myself to just keep things up to date, provide perspective, explanation, and the rest. So just the usual for those who are familiar. I do have a couple of interviews planned that I'll mention soon, and all of that leading up to a bit over a month from now, the tour that comes to the United States. I will be out there, and ideally this time I'll be able to provide something a little different than what I've done before in getting videos of training and other discussions with people and things like that. So I'm pretty excited for that this summer.
Good for you. Plenty of days with no sleep coming up, so James.
Yes.
And thank you one and all for tuning in today. As always, be as kind as to drop a little like, a follow, a retweet, along with a quick review wherever you get your podcast. I say it every single week, but each one of them is very much appreciated and helps the footprint of the show to grow. Be sure to keep up to date with our socials as well at theatre_of_red and at the official Theatre of Red website, which is theatre-of-red.com. I'll be back with you next week to catch you up on the latest news surrounding incomings, outgoings, and whatever else rears its head. Stay safe. Have a lovely weekend.